All right, well, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. And now it is my great pleasure to announce our keynote panel, a conversation about the future. And I will turn it over to the Honorable Phil Weiser.
It is such a treat to be here with so many friends, former students, colleagues, and as Colorado's Attorney General. I have a real honor here with some special panelists who bring lots of great backgrounds. Before I acknowledge them, I do have to acknowledge, in case it hasn't been already, today is Dale Hatfield's birthday. Could you please join me?
Yes.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dale. Happy birthday to you. This conference wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Dale Hatfield when we were first starting. The most effective way to get anyone to join would be to write them and say, Dale Hatfield suggests that I invite you out to Boulder for a conference. And people invariably would say, whatever Dale wants, I'm happy to do, which is why we have a Dale Hatfield Scholars Program, a Dale Hatfield Professorship, and a lot of students who are so indebted to Dale. Also, I know we've got some folks here from ITP World. I don't know if Frank Barnes is here, but Frank also has a special role here. Because ITP, the Interdisciplinary Telecom Program, a lot of supporters, was committed to what we're doing right now, which is interdisciplinary conversations about technology. And that is something that has been the core of Silicon Flatirons, and it's fabulous to see it continuing. And I love being able to join from my new role. I can't begin to thank all of you and even articulate just how meaningful Silicon Flatirons has been to me in terms of what's brought me to where I am now. So with that, I think Patty Limerick doesn't need an introduction because she is such an icon here. The MacArthur Genius Award is a worthy one of many that she has. She's also our state's historian.
I was fired.
She was fired.
I'm glad you brought that up. Well, it was a huge relief. So.
How about the official fool role? Do you still have that role?
I'm that, and I was on the National Council on the Humanities, nominated by Obama, appointed by the Senate. So, but I've also been fired for that. So, replaced.
As you can see, Patty has a sense of humor and a deep perspective on history, and is a humanist. Casey Fieldsler is with our Information Sciences Department. Which is a relatively new department here. She's been a core collaborator with Silicon Flatirons and brings a really great perspective. She has a fascinating research agenda and I think calls herself on the more optimistic side, which apparently after this morning we need desperately discussions of. And finally, Carl Schroeder, who's new and who is a futurist and author, which is something that obviously is right on this conversation about the future. So I want to start with an economic lens, which often is part of the fears of the future. The fears, and Andrew Yang's presidential campaign taps into this pretty essentially, we're all screwed. The robots are coming and they're taking our jobs, and we are not going to recover. Now, there's an alternative story that most economists would say, which is just look back when the railroads came, when the automobile industry came, yes, people were displaced from jobs, but those displacements were temporary and people got new jobs. Let me just add a very important footnote to the economist story. They sort of gloss over all the short-term pain that happens because the person whose job's displaced, take for example at a coal mine, that same person is not necessarily going to be a cybersecurity professional. And so we have this real difficult challenge. New jobs are coming, but the people whose old jobs may or well not be trained for the new job. So you have sort of three separate arcs. One is we're all screwed. Second is it's all going to be fine, there'll be new jobs. And then third, the question of what about this transition? How hard is that going to be on people? So Casey, you're an optimist, so can you deliver the optimist answer there?
I described myself as an optimist who thinks it's really important to think like a pessimist. And I think this is actually kind of a good example. So if you take a historical perspective on this and you're like, well, we had telephone operators for a while and now we don't need those anymore, and they're all, jobs come in and out. And I think we're sometimes, I think it's important to be able to think towards the long-term consequences of a new technology, but sometimes you can do that in favor of not thinking about the short-term consequences. And I think it's really important that we do both. So if we're going to hope to eventually get to this place where, okay, well, if automation is taking jobs, then we're going to have new kinds of jobs in the future. Well, what happens in the meantime, this sort of transition period that you're thinking about? And I think you have to have that plan in place before you can get towards something that's going to be good in the future.
Patty.
Well, there are worse and better ways to do it, and the pattern is usually to do it the worst way. So what a nice way to have posterity to remember this industry and economy if you could do it the better way. And there's no reason why you couldn't, because job retraining, we don't know the minds and souls of coal miners. We don't know who's there and what they could be. In many cases, it's a family thing and that was just passed on, and there could really be somebody waiting to happen in a different sphere there. So it sounds like from the Congressman's remarks that we'll soon be out of jobs here in higher education. So that's okay, because we're going to give up bricks and mortars and move on. But why not have a real dynamic relationship with higher education on how to retrain people for different lines of work if we are going to be as aimless? The congressman needs to know the difference between baby boomers, who are the tenured full professors, and the faculty members who are under 45. I'm just going to say that, and I will tell him that myself, that there's a lot more hope for change there. But anyway, so there are ways to do graceful transitions. There are ways in which enterprising people use mobility as a solution. That is not great. It's kind of pleasant for some people to feel tied to place and family and so on, and mobility is a kind of difficult decision to make, but that can work. And then there are just enterprising things that people do. Quite a number, this is something some of you have heard from me before, a number of Indian tribes made pretty remarkable transitions to cattle raising. And a lot of the skills that they had before the conquest could carry over to that. So there's a lot of different options, but I'm totally with Casey. Just don't wait to be surprised by this, but really get to work on what you can do to make posterity love you for having done it so well.
So Carl, Brad Feld, who's often at these conferences, says we all need to be reading more science fiction, which I assume is
absolutely
music to your ears.
You need to be reading my science fiction.
In particular.
I can't remember if he said that or not.
Part of the challenge to get to what I think both Casey and Patty is the imagination, and for people who are on the precipice of disruption, to use the overused word, it is hard to embrace that it's happening. So part of the reason these transitions are so hard is that people who it's happening to don't want to believe it. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on, just focusing particularly on that issue, but then also more broadly, and how do we work towards an acceptance of what I would say is inevitable? It's just technological change will change the nature of work.
Yeah. When you're completely within the system, you can't even conceive of something outside of the system. So when we try and describe the future, we do so using the language that we have, and that language contains all of the assumptions that we've got and all the blind spots. So we literally can't do it. You have to fall into it. You have to fall out of the world that you're in and into the new one to really see it. Take, for example, jobs and retraining and stuff. I see the paradigm or the concept of the job itself going away, not in the sense of the Star Trek sort of labor-free society, but that for the last 150 years or almost 200 years, we've been concerned with the material economy and with material production. And the idea of the job is closely related to the philosophy of Taylorism, the interchangeability of workers. And so when we think about the future, we're still thinking about jobs, and which means we're still thinking about how we can go into some interchangeable position. I'm a physician, or I'm I'm a lawyer, or but one can be replaced by another, and the role is still fulfilled. That is what I see going away due to AI and automation. And that blows away the paradigm for having a conversation about jobs. It's no longer a coherent thing to even think about. So it gets to be really, really hard to talk about change when it's that kind of change. That's where fiction comes in, because it allows you to provide a multidimensional experience to people with touchstones that they can understand, such as the physical reactions and emotions of a main character and their hopes and dreams and things, while leading them through what is going to be an incredibly strange and strange-making experience. If I just go back, rewind this, and talk only about the category of the job going away, I'll get blank stares. It just does not compute. But it's absolutely necessary to have conversations like that, and therefore we need a medium for doing it.
Let me take what you said, and Patty, and go in this direction. One of the challenges that I experienced in sort of leader of higher education, and this is the generous interpretation of what our congressman might have been trying to say, is people are imprisoned, Carl said it well, by their past way they've been shaped. So if you talk to an anthropologist, their view of the world is they're teaching anthropology, and the jobs that they're teaching are going to be so people can teach anthropology, get a PhD in anthropology. The alternative view, I would say, is no, you're developing competencies that can have value to people in a range of contexts. And in anthropology, you are very well suited to develop the competency of empathy, which I believe is one of the most important 21st century competencies. That's a whole nother way of thinking. I find that actually to be an optimistic way of thinking, but the challenge is when, for example, I would have that conversation with our anthropology department, whose majors have been cut way in half because there are less jobs. They don't find that an easy pill to swallow.
Right. If I could just go there, I am not disagreeing with the congressman on his assessment of higher education's resistance to change. I wasn't whooping in the back. I often whoop, but I thought that would be inappropriate if a baby boomer in the back begins whooping as I did at rock concerts in days of yore, so I'm not going to do that. But I see no reason why we couldn't adapt in exactly the way. I'm really proud to say my Center of the American West got an $800,000 grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to help young historians repurpose their academic skills to be helpful in the world. And academic conditioning is really hardwired, if I can use that phrase here. I mean, it's really hard to get that loosened up, and it's working. We're finding it working. So, and society's receptivity to this, I think, is quite good, but they will not take it if the poor young person shows up and does, oh Lord, my people come in, and they might make an opening remark, and then they will start reading their text. That's what my people, the humanities people, do that. I could do that for you now if you would like that, but it would change my standing. So the sky is the limit for what could happen. And getting the older faculty in particular, sometimes the younger faculty can get fully drawn into this, but getting them to say, oh, wait, we're sitting right next to a route that could lead us to giving really satisfying lives to our students. Why wouldn't we go there? So that's
it's imagination. I think Carl's point is the problem is the imagination tends to be constrained often by the past, and the concept of a job and your identity are often hardwired, and so to decouple that is scary.
Right, and I can set up the next question, but I forgot to say the thing that's most important is that I am the greatest fan in the world of the phrase, okay, boomer. Because that has so been needed, some way of saying, and it's so funny that boomers are prickly and sensitive, because if you recall how boomers treated their elders, it was not exactly a festival of respect and honor for the aged. But I think okay, boomer is an olive branch between the generations. It's got a sharp point on it. It's been whittled down a little bit there. But it is such a great way of saying to my age group when we are stuck, just, okay, boomer. This is how you want to be remembered? Is this it? Boomer. So it's just great. I'm so happy. So I'll pass the next question.
All right, let me go to culture and go back to Casey, because part of what the emerging technological environment is testing is the hypothesis that we're going to open up new forms of cultural exploration, opportunities to contribute that didn't exist previously. We're going to, and again, an overused word, disintermediate the role of, for example, record labels, so anyone can be a star. Casey, how's that promise, whether it's on fan fiction or fiction writers or music, how's that being realized so far?
I think that's actually one of the things to be most optimistic about in terms of technology right now. I mean, I think it's easy to look at user-generated content and the way that it's made it so easy for so many people to talk and to create content online and look at the bad outcomes of that, which of course there are a lot. But one of the things that it's really done is it's actually a little bit of the kind of thing that Amy was talking about in her opening this morning. Like, the internet just opened up a whole new world in terms of being able to connect to people that you couldn't previously. And I think that one of the biggest promises of that is creativity, which means, of course, opening up opportunities for people to be sort of discovered in non-traditional ways. YouTube is certainly a great example of that. But not even just that, just the ability for people to connect in creative communities and share what they love. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's like a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Maybe it's just this amazing opportunity to create and to share that with other people. And these communities often also become really important support spaces. And I think this is the other thing about the internet. It's so easy to focus on all of this really bad stuff. And in the last panel, it was talking a little bit about when does the good outweigh the harm. I mean, the thing that really concerns me about that conversation is that often that answer is very different for different groups of people. But when you think of some people who are in more vulnerable positions as well, sometimes when you are in a completely unsupportive space in your real life, the only place where you can find that kind of support system online, which often interacts with creativity and user-generated content and these kinds of things. So I think that's one of the more positive spaces on the internet right now.
Carl, what was your take on that?
Well, it's interesting. I heard a statistic a few days ago which made a lot of things make a lot more sense to me. Back in 1995, when I was shopping my first novel around, my book would compete against about 100,000 other novels. Now, my new book is out there in the face of about 18 million other books. So this is actually a good thing, because it means that Casey's right, that creativity has been democratized. It also means that the business model for my generation of authors is being destroyed. But there never really was a business model for the arts. In general, the arts have only ever been sustained by patronage. So this is not really something new. I might mourn, the lack of the $1 million advance and not getting film rights sales in six figures. But in place of that, we're getting the equivalent to what happened when the gramophone came into existence, and John Philip Sousa tried to sue to get it suppressed. Because for him, music was itinerant musicians going from town to town and playing in front of people, which was a wonderful experience for everyone. But it didn't actually make music available to everyone. And the gramophone did. So we're at one of those liminal moments of change where an entirely old way of life for the creative classes is going away, and something new is replacing it. And there will be mourning, but I think on the whole it'll be very good.
Let me segue from that to Patty with respect to information and what often gets called political polarization. There are boomers out there who bemoan the world that is lost when you had Walter Cronkite and a couple other old white men tell us what the news was. And we had dominant newspapers enabled by classified ads who could tell us what the news was. That environment is gone. It's been replaced, cable news, internet, blogosphere, podcast, etc. And information is now so polarized that people are often said to be living in separate worlds where each of them are believing very different things because they're getting totally different information. Is the world that existed, call it circa 1960 to 2000, is that the exception in terms of information? And say, have we always had polarization, right? Or is what's happening now different and going to lead us to a new place?
Yes, to both of those. We have always had polarization. I was in college. I started college in 1968, and I went to my first protest. This is very meaningful. We shut down the Central Services Building in the Redwoods at UC Santa Cruz. And I can tell you, Secretary McNamara was really frightened when we did that. He thought, oh, I better reevaluate my foreign policy. So the secretaries could not get to work. That was a really big. So anyway, so I was there, and I was 17, and they told some experienced protesters came and said to us, you know that when the SWAT team comes, they will try to step on your foot to crush the arch in your foot. And so I thought, I better get better shoes. So I went back to the dorm and got heavier boots on and checked. And yes, there were some cookies from my mother at the. So it was very silly. It was really a silly exercise. And there were SWAT teams. And when they stepped forward, I saw them a few times, they'd swing their. So for me to say, oh, I can tell you the 1960s, very harmonic, really what a wonderful thing, unless you were on the receiving end of the baton, or unless you were the SWAT team person who had to do that. So sorry, too long, but. The shoe story is funny. So there's no place really to go to romanticize a golden age. Sometimes it seemed harmonic because people were silenced. That's not an occasion for nostalgia. Can't be doing that. So the Civil War, 1850s, everyone always says this onset of the Civil War, that was worse than anything we have now, and thousands of people died. So I've said that a number of times. I take no comfort particularly from it. To say that these terrible things happened in the 1850s seems like. And your point is what? Your point is that we're to be pleased with the fact that we're in the state we're in? No, I don't think that doesn't add up, because to say people have been more miserable, well, where is the comfort in that? So I think we can certainly study and learn from the episodes. There are interesting, I'm not sure if we should call them double agents or peacemakers, but in all of those episodes, there are people going back and forth and trying to make that different. We should certainly be studying their history and celebrating them. There's a man named James Fairchild who put, I think, 17 Modoc Indian people, women and children and men, into his wagon and tried to save them during the Modoc Wars and drove them away and got stopped by some vigilantes, and many were killed in his wagon. But James Fairchild, there is a person who we could look at. Well, there you are. As a Western American historian, the period of the Indian Wars, good heaven's sake. So does that mean we should just say, great, bring it on, let's fight, it's really fun. They did it before and the nation survived? No. It seems like those are cautionary tales more than they're comforting tales. And the cautionary tales are good, we can do something with that. Then my last sentence is that I think social media changes everything. So I'm a little bit out of business on the business of, the slogan of the Central American West, turning hindsight into foresight. You put social media and the power of disinformation and clumping people and groups of reinforcement. I know nothing. I do know that abolitionists spoke to each other and slaveholders spoke to each other. I know that there were groups of people who could not tolerate each other who found affirmation in speaking to each other. I know that. But I know nothing in history that is on the scale and the intensity of this. So I just talked to you about history, and then I told you there was no point in listening to me because it's all irrelevant now.
I'll go to Casey next. Social media, and I'll add the word that, again, is getting more and more in the conversation, deep fakes, things that are put out there that look real, that people might want to believe. How is that changing our politics? How will it change our politics?
So I think Patty's right. I think that social media has changed a lot in this sense. I mean, the promise of the internet was that it's going to connect the world. And the optimistic view is that it did this, and the pessimistic view is that we don't like each other as much as we might have thought we did, which I think is one of the things that has led to polarization, is that now people want to pull apart from connecting to the rest of the world for good reasons, and then there are kind of the reasons why you might want this to happen. I mean, we talked about online harassment and hate speech in the last panel, and should we have content controls over this, over this kind of content? And then in the meantime, when you look at the issue of misinformation, people immediately jump to this as a technological problem, right? Like I think there's no question that it's having an impact on the information that people see, which has an impact on the way that they vote. And people tend to jump to, well, Facebook needs to fix it, and Google and YouTube need to fix it. It's an algorithm problem. And maybe like there's a technological Band-Aid that you could put on this problem, but at the end, it's a very human problem. I mean, the problem is, why are we creating this? Why are we sharing it? Why are we believing it? And I mean, I once talked to someone when I caught them sharing very obvious fake information on Facebook, and I said, "Why did you believe this enough to share it?" And they said, "Well, Casey, I think that I believe the things that confirm the things that I already think." And I was like, yes. And even if you're self-aware enough to know that, it might not change anything, right? And so even if, so let's say that, we fix the algorithm, and now misinformation is dumped to the very bottom of the search results. Maybe it's on page 3 of Google. You're still going to click through all the pages, and you're like, oh, this is mainstream news, or this is fake news, or this is something, these are from sources that I don't trust. And then you're going to stop when you get to the thing to click on that confirms what you already think. Right. And the problem is that this problem, the social problem, is so much harder to solve than let's fix an algorithm.
Well, we had an algorithm before, Walter Cronkite.
Right, exactly.
The information wasn't out there. Now, the information is out there, and the best case scenario you're saying is it'll be a little harder to get to, but what you're saying, the real problem is that people want it, and once they get it, they're going to share it via social media, and so it's going to be really hard to tame this, call it misinformation beast.
Yes. Sorry. I was supposed to be the optimist.
No, it's okay. Carl, you've been on culture. You were optimistic. So, Carl, what's your take on this misinformation challenge for our political system?
I thought I understood it, and I thought I had a solution up until about 2 minutes ago. And now I've realized that I don't. I wrote a story for MIT Technology Review a couple of years ago called Noon in the Anti-Library. And I ended up getting actually invited to Athens to speak in front of the International Association of Libraries.
Can I do a product endorsement?
Oh, sure.
That's a really good story. It's really good, and that's just a product.
I wish you could buy it rather than it being free. But it is in fact free online. In any case, it's about what happens when AI gets fast enough that it can create deep fake libraries on demand instantly, or the anti-net, deep fake internet's worth of false information. So I went to Athens, and I decided to scare the librarians, and I told them about this idea, and then I said, but the thing is that, of course, the important thing about information as we had it was that it had inertia, both physically and in a real sense, and in terms of its movement through society. A library has actual physical inertia. It is costly to make and produce books. It's costly to create and make libraries. So when we create and disseminate this information, the crap gets filtered out. And I used to believe that. I believed that when I said it. But now I'm just seeing that, in fact, what we were doing was we were populating those libraries with stuff that could be paid for by the rich white guys who were in control of everything. So maybe we never really have had the facts that we are that we think that we are losing now. And that puts us in completely uncharted territory. It essentially turns the entire world from a world of facts and politics into a world of politics, where everything is political all the way down. And I think that's, what we have to deal with.
Patty?
Oh, I'm going to tell you what he meant to say. I haven't read the story.
Sure.
I'm in position for that.
Well, that's fair enough.
Well, I love the story, and I'm going to begin with a defense of rich white guys.
Okay.
Because they did put a lot of things in those libraries. I mean, they put Uncle Tom's Cabin, they put Frederick Douglass's autobiography, they put a lot of things in those libraries. So, and maybe the librarians were sneaking around behind, but I don't think so. I think rich white guys have very interesting minds, and we would do better to celebrate that and build alliances with them. So, okay, rich white guys. Okay, boomers. Okay, rich white guys.
Okay, well,
Okay, so I do want to say what he meant to say, which
Yes.
is he wanted to tell you about the spectacular part of the story where the main character wants to correct this misery of disinformation, and there is this fellow the character recognizes it will do no good to have the best possible equipment that's just tracking down every occasion of distorted or any lie and correct that, because others, I mean, that's sweeping the sand off the beach. That's not going to work. So he decides that, may I just say it? Or
Yeah, go ahead.
Or do you want to say it?
I can't remember it, so go ahead.
I probably read it more recently than you. So the character decides the solution is to have a very effective digital way to make sure people are using the words to mean the same thing before they engage in a conversation. So they will converse, but before they go down the road of saying, you are an enemy of liberty, they have to find out what each of them means by liberty. And then they can then go back to the group that meant what they wanted, or they could actually have a conversation. And it is a kind of an empathy delivery device, I think. And
And I still believe that, yeah.
well, you still believe it. Why didn't you say it then? So
Well, let me riff on that.
Just kidding. But
Which is a challenge of our time is what are going to be new institutions rooted
Right.
in today's technological possibility that facilitate real dialogue, understanding, problem solving. Because if it's only a destructive enterprise where people just hate each other, that's pretty scary. But if you can actually think of what does the constructive enterprise
Right.
look like, you open up a realm of new possibilities.
And DJ referred to the killer app for empathy, and tolerance. And so I assume he has that designed. Where are you? So that just seemed like there's a really hopeful thing, and I think it was good to go for tolerance rather than empathy, which might be more manageable. But your translation thing in Western American history, my people write about all kinds of things, miners and cowboys and so on, and they don't write about interpreters and translators who were the most important people in the American West. Because whenever Indian people meet white people, if the translator screws it up, there's going to be violence. If the translator can work it out effectively, there will be less violence. So translators and interpreters, moderators, your character's design, if that's not our hope, then I will have to go back to
and this gets back to where Casey started, which is when you think about the challenge that Facebook faces, one way to think about it, Cass Sunstein has said, they have this incredible platform. They could try to make sure people see other views. What your response is, it doesn't matter what Facebook tries, people don't want it.
I think that's entirely possible, yes. Personally, my Facebook was curated for a long time where I saw lots of different views. I'm from Georgia. And after a while, I actually curated so that I did less of that because it felt like it was better for my mental health.
Yeah.
And because I have trouble not engaging when I, for example, see misinformation. And I think so. I mentioned earlier the sort of power of the internet for social support. And one of the things that I think is really important for that to work well is to be able to create smaller communities. I've been looking at Tumblr recently, and one of the challenges with Tumblr as a platform is that it's completely flat. There are no sub-communities, and so people who who like this thing, and people, let's use a very innocuous example, the Star Wars fans and the Star Trek fans, like they're all in one place.
As opposed to Reddit, where like they've got separate
Exactly.
threads.
So there's no sub-communities. And so you either have the choice to engage with everyone all at the same time, or to go to a, somewhere that's much more private, like say a Discord server or a private Facebook group, which then limits the discoverability of those spaces, which makes it difficult for people to find when they need social support. So I think it would be, actually Reddit is an interesting example because it does have sub-communities, but a bit more discoverability. But what I would really like to see in platform design is the ability to have both, where you can both speak to everyone at once when you want to, speak to who you want to. And for all the times we've mentioned sort of the negative aspects of Facebook, it's one of the only social platforms out there that has granular privacy settings where you can choose who you're talking to, except for Google Plus, RIP. I think this is one of the problems is that the affordances of the platform that you are completely changing the way that you can interact with people. And this is actually one of the reasons why then platforms have so much control over how we're interacting, I think, without us realizing it. Like, if you're on Twitter and then you have it brought up earlier, like why would you stay on social media if harassment is happening? Well, your only choice is to be there or to not be there. And if everyone who is in a vulnerable position decides to not be there, then it's a particular kind of voices that are then not being heard. Whereas this could change if, for example, Twitter started having granular privacy settings. So this really, it impacts the way that people can interact.
I've got some more questions, but I'd love to get questions from the audience, and we do have a Norm.
I just wanted to make an optimistic statement. I wrote this and I put a star by it because and someone else, I'm echoing something somebody said, but I didn't keep track of who said it. But the optimism that is huge is that this is the area that presents problems, but it also presents the greatest potential for dealing with and solving all the other problems. So rather than the get in line digital and high-tech people, it's really get to the front of the line and work on your own problems. But it's what you were telling me about the forms of taking scenarios and finding consensus. And so it's what's really different, and a basis for optimism is that I don't think you can say that if it comes to infectious disease. I don't think you can say those people they can send them out, or any other sort of thing like that. You have to say it'll be really good if they can take that on, but you can't say they could contribute to the solution of all the other problems, and that's what I think is the case here. And if I left without saying that optimistic thing, I would have to stop everyone in the hallway and tell them my optimistic thing one by one. So thank you for tolerating that.
All right, so the norm is first a student with the first question. Corian's got the mic. All right, Wilson's got a question. We got two students, is that right? Is there? No, Wilson's got it.
So you guys talked about sort of this era of Cronkite when news was more, I guess, accessible, or you had only 3 networks, so necessarily news had to sort of cater to a larger audience. I guess one of the consequences of that breakup was we got, with cable, more, basically people could self-select into these filter bubbles with MSNBC or Fox. Is there a danger in potentially trying to break up Facebook or these platforms that you make the filter bubbles even worse because now people aren't just seeing things because of a filter bubble, but because they're on an entirely separate platform?
So this is doubling down on Casey's last point, which is in defense of Facebook, having this one dominant platform and social networking that everyone's on holds out the promise of a broad conversation. Is that something we should celebrate or at least appreciate? Carl, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, notwithstanding what we've said about the anti-librarian stuff, in the long run, I think this is a self-correcting problem. And the reason I think that is because I actually believe that there is a real world out there. And the more knowledge that you have of the actual world, the more successful you are going to be. So, people and societies who go into filter bubbles that are significantly disconnected from reality are just not going to do very well. And they may not do very well to the tunes of millions of people dying, unfortunately, over the next generation or so as we sort all of this out. But the fact is that our discourse has to ultimately be grounded in reality. So we will circle back around to some kind of a consensus. And it's not going to be the worldview that we have right now. But it's going to be something that's recognizable to a lot of us. And a lot more nuanced, I think a lot more generous. And it's, it's got to happen, or we simply cease functioning.
So there are a couple different strands there. With your last proviso, it could be said we're all going to hell in a handbasket. Or another way is we're on an unsustainable path, which will ultimately mean we're ungovernable. But you, before that, said this other thing, which is misinformation doesn't have a future because ultimately facts will matter. Obama, in his farewell address, said facts have a way of catching up with you.
Yeah.
When I talk about water management, for example, I say we can't deficit finance water. Right? We only have so much water. We have to decide how to use it. We need it. So pretending we have things we don't have is not a long-term viable strategy. Is that a fair way to say that?
Yeah, and pretending that new political actors such as the climate don't exist is also not viable, because the climate is a political actor and it will continue to be one. So you can walk around doing the na thing, but that's not going to make these new agents of change that have come into the world go away. And there's a lot of people who would like them to, and they're trying to remake the world in the image of a society that we no longer have. And they can remake the world, but it's not going to work.
To give people another optimistic take, and this fits in the institutions theme, one part of my job is I get to work on a range of different issues. So on water, I was at the Colorado Water Congress with a range of different stakeholders, very much operating the spirit that Carl just said, which is everyone in that room accepts climate change is happening because they're seeing it. We have less natural snowpack. It's 65 degrees in Antarctica. People know it. So like, okay, what are we going to do about it? There's none of that because they're saying it's our livelihoods that are on the line. We have more people in this state. We've got less natural snowpack, less water. How are we going to deal with it? And it's very solutions-oriented, very much thinking about innovation in a positive way. That is, again, another note of optimism. All right, we got questions from non-students in the room.
Plenty.
So Phil mentioned the new institutions, and Casey maybe mentioned some newer platforms or controls. I don't want to force hands into optimism, but I would love to know more thoughts about what we can create, and maybe this is getting too far into the next panel, or tomorrow, but what we can create and what it does look like that works in the future. How do we keep less people from dying before the facts catch up to us?
I'll start on this, then Casey and others can go. For me, that is the most important question. What are the constructive institutional designs of the future to address real challenges? And I had written a couple years ago an article called Entrepreneurial Administration, and one of the premises, these new institutions won't necessarily look like the prior classic governmental institutions that were more hierarchical. Often you hear the word command and control as how they would operate. So for example, here's an institution that I am a fan of, the LEED building standard, which is what governs this building's energy efficiency and green values. That's not set by a governmental body, actually. It's set by the Green Building Council. Now, there is a governmental standard called Energy Star. I'm a fan of that, too. You could have imagined a world where Energy Star was set by a private sector body and the the LEED standard was set by a governmental body, which partly means governmental entities, and call it civil society entities, compete in the market for governance to develop solutions. And so one optimistic take is you'll see new institutional develops, BTAG, to take a Dale Hatfield example, would be another one, and governments can help support them towards solutions. The Green Building Standard is supported, encouraged by governments. And these institutions can grow up in lots of different ways. There are certain values they've got to reflect, some of the same values we think about with administrative agencies, being legitimate, being open, being transparent. And in that sense, there's a lot of room for this to happen, and it's going to take a new approach to governance to help it happen. So that'll be my answer to that.
So rather than giving you my optimistic view of a platform of the future, because I can't come up with it in 20 seconds, let me give you my optimistic view of the people who are going to build the platforms of the future. So I've been thinking a lot about how we teach technologists about ethics and the social impact of technology and that kind of thing. And the first big cultural change that I think we need to make is to make thinking about the ethical and social implications of technology an integral part of technical practice, so that it is not a specialization, it's not the thing that you learn in your required ethics class at the end of your computer science degree, but it is in every single class that you take along the way. It's in every coding boot camp. It's when you learn to code when you're 5. It's the idea that code is power and that what you build will have implications potentially for the entire world in some circumstances. And then the second part is that I think one way to do this is to really encourage and cultivate a skill of speculative thinking. A lot of this is about thinking about the unintended consequences of technology, of thinking about how bad actors could use the thing that you're building that you have very, very good intentions for, in order to figure out how to design to mitigate those possible harms. And there aren't always good answers to this, but at least if every single person is thinking about it, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't really remember much content from law school, but I do remember that thing they tell you about how to think like a lawyer, right? So you hear that, right? You learn to think like a lawyer when you're in law school. And one of the things that I think is actually the most valuable skill you learn in law school is issue spotting. And I think that computer science students and other people who are going to build things should get much better at issue spotting. And so I think that is one of the ways, like if we can, read one of Carl's stories and have a lot of fun thinking about the ethical implications of some technology people might create in 100 years, then you should be able to think about the potential consequences of what you are creating right now.
So I have 3 things. One of them I might not have thought of, but the water managers are people to steer by. I've been going to those meetings for more than 30 years, and mostly we talked about ditch gauges for quite a long time, and that's pretty dreary. It's not anymore, because, I don't know what, maybe 15 years or so ago, they started saying, when someone would say something about climate change denial, they'd say, well, we can't afford that. We're in water management. We can't do that. And then just move on to what they're, so that was quite inspirational. But they also, oh my goodness, I'm sorry to say that they used to be dreary, but we had, at one of the last meetings of the Northern Colorado group, we had an engineer who had worked in Flint, Michigan, helping people there, testifying, but telling us about his experience. Speaking of empathy, that was an amazing thing. We had a panel, a very forthright panel on women in that profession, which wasn't happening until very recently, but anyway, it was just remarkable. Me Too era, but very frank discussion of that. So the water managers, who knew, but they are the people to really live with and watch, not necessarily from any intrinsic moral superiority, but they didn't have any choice. It's the reality thing there. So, and then the second thing is that I think because people do seem to love book clubs, don't quite know why, but I'm sad about the book sales, but I've not seen the campaign that says, save humanity and save the planet, join a sci-fi book club. But why not?
Sure.
And if we could get people having these discussions, I mean, I don't know where else you would go really to get engaging. If you said, we are going to read policy papers in our policy paper club, better have really good snacks at that if we're going to get anybody on that one. But we are
Bring out the edibles, yeah.
But so we are going to, indulge ourselves in reading something that will be engaging and fun, is scary and fun. But we were told that we're going to do that because that will help us save the planet and save humanity. So I would do that. And then there's my dream of having, I just learned the phrase incident meteorologist, so that when there is a wildfire event, there's a meteorologist detailed for really closely working on predictions and forecasts. And those people have saved lives. So incident meteorologist, that's good, but incident historian. So there should be just a team of trained young people who would just be there to say, this is the larger perspective. Because I think, other speakers have been really, really good about saying, some of us here, think long term. If you're gauging optimism and pessimism by the thing that's right in front of you, might be very emotionally satisfying, but it's really not a very evidence-based thing to do. So, I have a science guy over there who just was the first to say think long-term, and he's a closet historian is what he is. So we are, and that's fine to have the closet historians mobilized as well, but it does seem like historians could be very useful in saying think longer and into the past, but also into the future, and think what posterity is going to think of you, which is a pitch I was making earlier. So those are my...
I'll try and be really brief, but I don't know if I can. If humanity is the fox guarding the hen house with regards to Earth's resources, which is going beyond IT to the larger problems that we face, then one of my ideas lately has been to look for other caretakers who can be political agents with more integrity than us. So in my current novel, Stealing Worlds, I create what I call deodans, which are artificial intelligences that think they are watersheds, rivers, lakes, forests, and so forth. And they're rational actors and act on behalf of those entities. So they are literally a new class of political and economic actor that use our own economy to basically safeguard the natural world. There's also what I call actants, which are AIs that think they are things that need to go away, such as there's one that thinks it's the Flint water supply. It's suicidal. Its aim is to make itself, that particular current water system, go away. And if you can create AI, why can't you create an AI with a purpose like that? We are going to be onboarding some really interesting and strange tools over the next decade or so. So although what I just said may sound like science fiction, I'm actually working with some friends of mine to make a deodand. So these things aren't as far off as they might seem.
A friend of mine thinking about this design is working on something he calls democracy machine. I don't think he thought about having AIs play a role, but it's an intriguing opportunity. I want to get to the last question, but I do want to first, in service of Patty's point about the long run, there's a great story of Henry Kissinger and Chou En-lai, when Kissinger says, "What do you think about the French Revolution?" And Chou En-lai says, "It's too soon to tell."
Oh.
Yes.
So with that, I want to ask each of you, 20 years from now, what changes will have happened, whether they're optimistic, pessimistic, good or bad, that will be most either surprising to us or transformative?
Well, actually, before I answer that question, because Patty brought it up, I should probably plug my sci-fi book club.
Oh, what do you know?
It's called the Speculative Ethics Book Club, and the hashtag's on Twitter. It's SEBC. And right now, the book is called Infomocracy, which I think that a lot of people in this room, given the conversations today, would find very interesting.
Yes. Excellent.
20 years from now, I mean, I've been thinking about this all day ever since I saw Phil's question this morning, and it's so hard to answer that because we're so bad at this. Like, where's my flying car? And because we're so bad at it, I feel like I can be more optimistic than I might be otherwise, like considering the current trajectory of technology. And so considering that I think that AI is definitely going to play a really, really big role in our future, I would just I would like to imagine a future where we're seeing more of the kinds of good things that people were mentioning this morning in terms of healthcare advancements and AI and this kind of thing, and less of the bad things. I'm too scared to try to go any more detailed than that to stay optimistic. So.
To say, by the way, how bad we are, for people who want a reminder, watch Back to the Future 2. Set in 2015, made circa 1987 or something. They missed a lot.
Well, I'm not going to retire very right away, and I don't really like the idea of retirement, but I feel better after this panel, because if I were to retire, I could read Carl's books and I could audit Casey's classes. So I think.
And join our book club.
And join book club. So that seems like that's the best idea I've had about retirement. So I appreciate the company here a lot.
And we could use an historian at the AG's office too, Patty. So.
You want one?
Amen. You're hired.
I'm not the state historian anymore.
You could be the AG's office historian. So.
What a lovely session we're having here. So, so I guess the phrase that historians are very kind of bad armchair quarterbacks or backseat drivers when we're not at our most thoughtful, I guess. And so unintended consequences, unforeseen outcomes, that's kind of our stock and trade. And we're really good at that. If you want us to point out unintended consequences and unforeseen outcomes and so on, we can really do that. What good that does anybody who is a practitioner in the moment before us, I don't know. Because it says, it kind of says, be afraid, be very afraid, but I can't tell you what about. I can't specify that. So, but I think that that's the world that I would think would be very positive. Well, first of all, the baby boomers speaking of retirement, will be, okay, boomers, okay. So I do think, I just have, in the field of Western American history, the area I know best, what younger people are doing and thinking and how they're conducting themselves is really, that's the best place to go to feel better about the future. So I'm stereotyping my people terribly, but there's some basis for that. So kind of, it varies tremendously. So they're as diverse as any other group. So they'll be 20 years from now. Okay, don't let medical scientists figure out how to keep these people in their jobs. Just don't let that happen. Don't do that. Okay, so sorry, that's not euthanasia. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying let them sit and read books. That would be nice. So I think that the hope is for that generational transition and for the sense that we could do something very much like what ecosystem managers at their best do, which is to put up activity, a policy, a change, a new approach into action, and then monitor the hell out of that. And just keep saying, are we getting the results that we wanted? We all agreed that we wanted to give this a try. Well, for heaven's sake, now it is producing the opposite of the results that we wanted, or something close to that. So I think that practice called adaptive management, which we are at this point really not doing so well in the environmental governance rule, so it's a funny place to go to look for it. But the on-the-ground ecosystem managers are just doing that all the time. We wanted to enhance this species. That species is looking frail and passing away. Well, how did that happen? That wasn't our intention. What did we need to change? So that constant self-examination and monitoring of results, I would like to see that just become, well, yeah, of course we're doing that. We don't just pass a law and then think, taken care of here. That's when we really get into close observation of what, I used to think that was the most boring term in the world, implementation, good Lord. It's got the most drama, it's got the most intensity, Shakespeare, I think, wrote about implementation. I think most of his best plays are about, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's an interesting idea. But implementation captured in its full drama and observed closely, and I don't think that was right about Shakespeare, so please forget that I said that.
Well, I think we're expending a lot of technical expertise to solve all problems except the only one that actually matters, which is how do we govern ourselves?
Well, good point. Yeah.
And if I were to be optimistic, I would say that 20 years from now, looking back, we would see that we had undergone a revolution in self-governance, both on the personal, the group, and national and international levels. And it is literally the only problem because all other problems that we have to solve are dependent on this one. So let's do it.
What's your book recommendation?
Of mine.
Of course.
Stealing Worlds, which came out in June, and is about a near future, 15 years from now, utopian revolution that starts in Dayton, Ohio.
Can we thank our panelists?
Really fun. Sorry for pushing so hard on that story. That was very
Oh yeah, that's okay.
We have the student awards right up, right?
Thank you very much to our keynote panelists and Attorney General Weiser. And now, Amy, if you'd like to come back down and present the Silicon's Flatiron Annual Student Awards.
Hey, everybody. If you can all just stick with us for a few minutes, we're going to take an opportunity to recognize some of the really great work done by our students over the last year. And to present our first student award, I'm going to welcome to the stage very close friend of Silicon Flatirons, partner at WilmerHale, Ben Fernandez.
All right, thanks, Amy. So as I was walking in today, I saw a license plate out there that said nerd, and I thought, I am among friends. So, what a great event. So each year we accept papers written about a topic in law and technology, and we judge them with a panel of attorneys at WilmerHale. Why do we do this? We do this to promote the kind of research and writing and thinking and editing that goes into writing a scholarly paper. So the winner gets $1,000 and an opportunity for publication in the Colorado Technology Law Journal. And this marks the 17th year of the contest. So again, we received a great set of papers once again this year. It was tough to judge because they were all so good. But as judges must do, we've selected a winner. So at this time, I'm pleased to announce the winner of this year's WilmerHale Writing Competition is Jordan Regenet. Jordan, if you'd like to come forward, please. So Jordan wrote a paper entitled On-Orbit Services Are Ready for Liftoff. The United States regulatory framework is sufficient to usher in a new era of commercial space activity. So we commend Jordan for the research and the writing that went into his paper. Please join me in congratulating him once again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. Now I have the great pleasure, I didn't get to welcome him to the stage the first time, so I get to do it this time, to welcome Colorado Attorney General, founder of Silicon Flatirons, all around probably most amazing person, Phil Weiser.
So one thing I miss dearly as Attorney General is having as much time with the students. I did teach antitrust law this fall and a seminar on law and economics and information age the year before, so I can't let go of teaching entirely, but I don't have the same intensity. I remember vividly when I met the recipient of this when he started, and I've had the pleasure of writing a letter of reference for him in which I've been able to invoke Pierre de Vries, who I think is here, who's one of the harder judges of talent I know, and the Weiser Multitasker Award also goes to Jordan, so come back up, Jordan. And I don't know if you've ever had someone win both these two awards, so it's quite a accomplishment for Jordan, who I believe is still looking for a job. I do hope you'll be applying at our office.
Thank you.
If others of you out there want to compete for my belief in competition, please do. So congratulate Jordan, really.
Thank you so much.
So I get to present the next two awards, and I'm super, super honored to do this. The winner of the Silicon Flatirons Leadership Award was one of the first students who reached out to me when it was announced that I was taking over for Silicon Flatirons. She is always been very impressive. She's right on top of everything. She is quick to volunteer when we need somebody to step in or pitch in. So I want to welcome to the stage to receive the Silicon Flatirons Leadership Award, Corianne Zacher. Corianne is also the editor-in-chief of the CTLJ, of which there are many copies sitting out in the lobby if you haven't picked one up.
Thank you.
And the final award. You've heard me say his name a few times already. He's been leading us through this conference and putting up with emails from me nonstop and always super responsive. The winner of the Silicon Flatirons MVP award is Connor May. All right, we're going to reset the stage for our legal debate that's coming up next. Just give us a few minutes. We're going to start again at 2:15, which is 7 minutes from now. So if you go outside the room, make sure to make it a quick trip. Thank you.